Ok.
Já vou te adicionar.
Não? Ótimo. Posso começar, Walter? Ok. Então, é um prazer para a gente poder receber aqui para fechar o evento. Estamos todos com um certo grau de cansaço depois desses dias aqui na correria. Mas, de qualquer forma, é um prazer para a gente receber o professor Andrew Youpa, da Southern Illinois University at Carbondale, em Illinois. O professor Youpa é um dos maiores especialistas no trabalho de Spinoza e também de monismo, de forma geral, nos Estados Unidos, trabalho de Descartes, Hobbes. E foi para a gente um grande prazer quando ele aceitou o convite e estamos muito felizes de poder recebê-lo agora no final do evento. Esperamos que vocês possam acompanhar na medida do possível todo o trabalho. Eu acho que vai ser interessante também para a gente fazer vários paralelos com o que foi dito durante a semana, particularmente com o que vocês ouviram, os que estiveram aqui com o trabalho da Nelma. Eu acho que vai ser bastante interessante a gente fazer esse fechamento hoje. E, bom, só para questão de proporcionalidade linguística, também fazer a introdução em inglês e passar a palavra para o professor Youpa. So it's our pleasure to get here to finish our little Congress. Professor Youpa from Southern Illinois University. I would like to, on behalf of everybody, just to thank him for being such a good sport and accepting, presiding tables over us 20, beginners. And it's been a great way of introducing dialogue. It's been a great week of just discussions here, and I think this is the best way to close down. So without further ado, I'll just pass you the word, and thank you so much once again.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for coming, everyone, and thank you for having me. Can you hear me? It's been a really great time this week. I'd like to thank the organizers of the conference, Walter and Fabrício and Delmo, who's not here. Thank you so much for organizing this terrific conference. I've learned so much from all the talks. You guys did a wonderful job of putting this together, and all the papers have been excellent. Thank you for including me on the program. And thanks to Walter and to Carolina for your hospitality this week and showing me Rio. It's been really fun. And Fabrício too, who showed me to the top of Sugarloaf, which was amazing. It's been a terrific time. And thanks too to the university for putting this on, for allowing us to do this conference. So my paper is on Spinoza, and in this paper I tried to show and describe the kind of ethical position that Spinoza holds, the kind of ethical theory that he has. And the view that I defend here is one in which he subscribes to ethical objectivism. I think this tends not to be a very popular view with people. It tends not to be a popular reading of Spinoza, at least in the United States. And as an ethical theory, as a moral philosophy, ethical objectivism tends to be unpopular, I think, too. Yeah?
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah. Especially here at a meeting of contractualists. Ethical objectivism is not so popular. Spinoza himself was a kind of contractualist, though. He was a social contract theory. He has a social contract theory. And it's interesting, I think, that he also has this ethical objectivism. And I think we can't understand his social contract theory unless we understand his ethics properly. And I think that's one of the problems, at least in English-speaking scholarship on Spinoza, is that his ethical theory hasn't been well understood, and so his political theory hasn't been well understood. So by ethical objectivism, I mean a theory of the kind of life that is best for us as human beings. A theory based on a view on which good and bad are objective properties. So in seeking to demonstrate, this is what Spinoza tries to do. He tries to prove a theory of the good human life. That's what he's trying to show. That there is such a thing as a good human life, and it's objectively the case. This is a normative theory. It's a view about how we ought to live and how we ought not to live. That's what he's trying to tell us about. So I'll just get started. So by objective property, by an objective property, here in this paper, what I mean is a property whose instances does or do not directly depend on anyone's attitudes, emotions, desires, or beliefs. For example, according to this definition, diabetic is an objective property, right? You know what I'm...
Yeah.
It's an objective property because an instance of diabetes does not directly depend on anyone's desires, emotions, and beliefs about the existence and nature of diabetes. To use an example that Spinoza would have been familiar with, dropsy is an objective property. Dropsy was a disease that Spinoza was familiar with back in the 1600s. Dropsy is objective in the sense that instances of dropsy do not directly depend on anyone's desires, emotions, or beliefs about the existence and nature of dropsy. In contrast, being the supreme ice cream flavor does not count as an objective property because an instance of the supreme ice cream flavor directly depends on someone's desires, emotions, and beliefs about this supreme ice cream flavor. So whereas instances of dropsy would exist, or would have existed even if people had remained completely ignorant of dropsy, and even if no one had ever formed an unfavorable attitude towards dropsy, the supreme ice cream flavor is a property, an instance of which cannot exist without the existence of a favorable attitude toward a certain flavor of ice cream. So my thesis is that, for Spinoza, the properties of goodness and badness are objective, in the same sense that we think that diabetes is an objective property. He is committed to the view that instances of goodness do not directly depend on anyone's desires, emotions, and beliefs about the existence and nature of goodness. The same holds for badness. To establish this claim, I turn first to this first claim. That first claim up there on the board, if you can read it. I'm not sure you can read it from the back, but I can.
Está legível para vocês? Ok?
He says, the striving by which each thing strives to persevere in its being is nothing but the actual essence of the thing. A typically cryptic claim that he makes. What I take it that he means by this is that there's one and only one thing about us as human beings that constitutes what we essentially are. And that one thing that each and every one of us essentially is a power to act. That's how I interpret this claim. So there's one thing about us that we should try to protect and develop as much as we can, and try to avoid destroying or impairing as much as possible. We don't want to destroy or impair this one thing that makes us what we really are. And what it is that we really are is this power to act. And that next claim that I have up there on the board, he says, he makes a revealing point about this power that each and every one of us is this center of power. And what he says here in that second claim on the board, he says, we call good and And so he's explaining to us what he means by good and bad here. And he says, we call good or evil what is useful to or harmful to preserving our being. That is, what increases or diminishes, aids or restrains our power of acting. So he's saying, okay, so what I mean by good and evil here is anything that supports our ability to act is a good thing, and anything that impairs our ability to act is a bad thing. And so, from this idea that good and bad, that goodness is a matter of things. Good things are good because they help us become more powerful. Bad things are bad because they impair us. And this this comes out more clearly in the next. If you wanted to scroll down, he says here in this next quote that I have up on the board. He said, we could just look at that 31. And so far as the thing agrees with our nature is necessarily good. And since our nature is a thing that we are things that whose essential nature is power. Anything that agrees with our power is a good thing. Anything that doesn't is going to be a bad thing. And so far as, and that's what he says in the demonstration here. He says, so far as a thing agrees with our nature, it cannot be evil. So it must be either good or indifferent. If the latter is posited, that is neither good or evil, then nothing will follow from its nature. He's basically arguing that things that agree with our nature are good. Things that aren't, that don't agree with our nature will harm us in some way. And so, the idea then is that when he claims that power is our essential nature, when he makes that point, he's basically saying that the example, I have this example, but it won't. I'm trying to think of a better example here. Well, I'll just go with the example I've written down. Suppose someone says, knowledge of John Rawls's A Theory of Justice is the actual essence of a philosopher. Okay. It's a ridiculous claim, but imagine somebody holds such a view. Somebody writes out, knowledge of the contents of Rawls's A Theory of Justice is the actual essence of a philosopher. There are two ways of interpreting this funny claim. One would be to take it in a purely descriptive way, and another would be to take it in a normative way. If we take it in a normative way, it can be understood as a claim. If it is understood as a normative claim, then when we meet a philosopher who isn't familiar with the theory of justice, it doesn't become false. It means that that person isn't a real philosopher. If we understand it as a descriptive claim, then it's obviously false because there are plenty of philosophers who aren't familiar with the theory of justice, and so it would be false. And I'm saying, when Spinoza tells us about our actual essence, he's basically making this normative claim about what it is to be a real being. What it is to be a real being is to be a being who has some power. And that there's going to be a scale of how up here. So we can fail or succeed. We can more or less fail or succeed depending on how powerful we are. So if you scroll down, there's some. Yeah, the starred, these lines here. These are my words, not Spinoza's. But this is how these are the views that I'm attributing to Spinoza. So this is Spinoza, that's me. And so I'm suggesting that we think of what Spinoza is telling us as Goodness is identical to power enhancement. Badness is identical to power impairment. A simple way of thinking about this, and an accurate way of thinking about this, is that for Spinoza, goodness is a matter of empowerment. Badness is a matter of disempowerment. And that's all there is to goodness and badness for Spinoza. And this is a good example of what he's pointing. The next quote there on the board is a good example of what of the point that he's making. He says, cheerfulness cannot be excessive, but is always good. Melancholy, on the other hand, is always evil. Melancholy, we can think of, we would call nowadays, I guess, depression. But he says there that cheerfulness is a joy which, insofar as it is related to the body, consists in this: that all parts of the body are equally affected. That is, the body's power of acting is increased or aided, so that all of its parts maintain the same proportion of motion and rest to one another. Basically, the idea is that there are certain psychological states in which our power is increasing as a whole, and we feel this as joy. So what happens when you're feeling cheerful, when you're in Spinoza's sense of the word cheerful, what he would say is that your health as a whole is increasing. Your power as a whole is increasing. When somebody is depressed, he would say, well, what's going on when somebody is depressed? Their power as a whole is decreasing. And so, our emotions, on Spinoza's view, reflect whether our power is increasing or decreasing. So good moods indicate that there's something good going on inside, and that's why we feel happy. When we have bad moods and sadness, different types of sadness, there's something going on that's crippling us, psychologically crippling us in some way. So this is, so like diabetes and dropsy, and unlike the property of being the supreme ice cream flavor, instances of goodness do not directly depend on anyone's desires, emotions, and beliefs. This is because goodness is identical to power enhancement or empowerment, and instances of power enhancement do not directly depend on anyone's desires. So it doesn't matter what you personally think about your current state. You could be completely mistaken about whether you're actually undergoing whether your power is being enhanced or being improved, and you could be completely mistaken about whether your power is being impaired. It's not up to you to decide it. It's a fact of the matter whether your life is going well or whether your life is going poorly. In the same way that it's not a fact of the matter whether you have diabetes or not, except in the sense that it depends on your lifestyle and your choices in some cases. But it's not. So whether I have diabetes right now, it's not up to me in the sense that I can either choose not to have it or not. I may have it, and I would have to go to the doctor to find out. And Spinoza, that's how Spinoza thinks about goodness and badness, whether your life is going well or poorly. So, like the amount of sugar in your bloodstream, at this moment, your spinozistic power is either increasing or it is not. If it is increasing, you are in a good way, you are well. And if it is not, you are in a bad way, you are unwell. For most of us, most of the time, we are well in certain respects and unwell in other respects, and in some degree. This is usually a matter of degree, just as health is always a matter of degree. So for Spinoza, goodness is identical to well-being in the sense that well-being refers to the fact that a subject's power is increasing, and badness is identical to ill-being or illness in the sense that power is insofar as it refers to the fact that a person or individual's power is decreasing. There's a sense, I think there's a perfectly familiar sense in which, I think, I've already sort of revealed the sense in which I think this is a perfectly natural way of looking at good and bad. For Spinoza, when he talks about power, what he's talking about is health. And so, goodness and badness, in his view, are on a, they're as naturalistic, that these are features of the world in the same way that we think of health as a natural feature of the world, or a natural feature of human beings, or a natural feature of creatures who can be healthy or unhealthy. So although people today don't, generally speaking, identify themselves as Spinozists in ethics, I think most of us every day confirm our commitment to such a naturalistic ethics in all kinds of ways. For instance, in the way that we raise children. Our views about what qualifies as good parenting. And our interest in the nutritional content of our own and our children's diets. In the use of medications to ward off depression and other forms of psychological ill-being. We engage in all these practices and hold the beliefs we hold because we agree that, with Spinoza, that our good, what's good for us, is fixed by objective facts about the kinds of creatures that we are. And this second, and in this sense, there's, I have some more quotes that I think show this, make this point. If you go down a little bit, a little further, yeah, actually I think it was back down. A little more. A little bit more. Yeah, so we can look at this one. This is fine. He says, generally then, the affects, the emotions, are excessive and occupy the mind in the consideration of only one object so much that it cannot think of others. When this happens to a man who is not asleep, we say that he is mad or insane. Nor are they thought to be less mad who burn with love and dream with night and day only of a lover or a courtesan. For they usually provoke laughter. But when a greedy man thinks of nothing else but profit or money, and an ambitious man of esteem, they are not thought to be mad because they are usually troublesome and are considered worthy of hate. But greed, ambition, and lust really are a species of madness, even though they are not numbered among the diseases. And he goes on, there's another quote that comes right after that. That one, the second one up there on the board. Nothing forbids our pleasure except a savage and sad superstition, for why is it more proper to relieve our hunger and thirst than to rid ourselves of melancholy? These all are examples of the kind of naturalistic ethics that Spinoza holds. He thinks that certain emotional states like greed or ambition, the sort that he's talking about, are mental diseases on a par with any other kind of disease. These are impairments, psychological impairments and diseases. So for Spinoza, good and bad rest on a naturalistic conception of power, and his conception of power is a conception of health. In contrast with the theory of moral goodness and moral evil designed to serve as a standard for what an agent retributively deserves in terms of rewards and punishments, Spinoza's is the theory of natural goodness and natural badness. Well-being and ill-being are the central notions, and these serve as the standards for a good human life, and as the standards for what constitutes effective therapy. And so, one of the things, this idea that good and bad are natural properties, and that in some cases our power is being improved, and in some cases our power is being impaired. This brings up a sort of, makes his ethical theory very complex, because he recognizes that there are all different things in our environment. There are different environmental factors will cause things to both increase and decrease our power at the same time. That different things will cause increases in some people and decreases in others. And so there's a lot of it makes for a very complex theory, ethical theory, because of the different ways that our power responds to different environmental factors. I'm trying to skip ahead here. Do we?
Yeah.
All right. All right. So some emotional states he thinks of as, some of our emotions are ones in which our power is increasing as a whole. Some of our emotional states are ones in which our power is increasing in only one part of us. And so he thinks of, for instance, pleasure, he says, can be excessive and evil, whereas pain can be good insofar as pleasure or joy is evil. He thinks that pleasure registers an increase in power in one part of oneself, not an increase in one's power as a whole. Pain registers a decrease in power in one part of oneself, not a decrease in one's power as a whole. So this means that pleasure is, other things equal, good. Pleasure is good since it registers an increase in power, but an increase in power in one part of an individual, for example, as in drunkenness, can impair an individual's power as a whole, and in these cases, pleasure is bad. This makes it possible that pain, a decrease in power, can be good. As a decrease in power, pain is bad. As a check against the detrimental pleasure, pain is good. Similarly, he thinks that pity is bad. Spinoza thinks that pity as an emotion is a bad thing, but it's good when it's a check against cold-blooded indifference. So we get this hierarchy of emotions, psychological states. If you go down, I think I have a little further. Yeah. So we have, he's able to, in my opinion, he has this kind of hierarchy of emotional states depending on whether the emotions are always good. Certain emotions are always good, like cheerfulness or rational self-esteem. Some emotions are good some of the time, like pleasure and love. But these are things that can also get out of hand. Love can become too intense and makes obsessive. The pleasure of drinking can become excessive. So there are certain types of things that are positive, but they can get out of hand, and so that's the kind of. And then we have things that are bad emotions like pain. But in some cases they can be okay. If the kind of pain that we have to suffer through when we go to the dentist to get our teeth cleaned or something like that. Sometimes fear can be a good thing when it warns us about some approaching danger. Humility he thinks of as bad, but it can be a check against bad emotions like arrogance or something like that. Some things he thinks is always bad. Certain psychological states are always evil, and one of those is hatred. Hatred is something that he thinks is always decreasing or impairing your power as a whole. So when your health is completely, your psychological health is completely decreasing insofar as one is experiencing hatred. And so with this kind of way of talking about this hierarchy of emotions, this way of speaking of psychological health, it provides Spinoza with the basis for his views about whether our desires are good or bad. Certain desires will come from certain emotions, and desires that come from indefeasibly good emotions are going to be good. Emotions that come from hatred, for instance, are going to, desires that come from hatred, a desire for revenge, for instance, is always bad. Desires that come from depression or melancholy, those two will always be bad. And so the goodness and badness of our desires depends on the goodness and badness of the motive of the emotions that they arise from. So Spinoza's naturalism is responsible for this kind of messiness and this complexity here. He thinks that as human beings, we are complex systems operating in an environment that is sometimes cooperative and sometimes uncooperative. Not all elements of the complex system that is a human organism respond to the same environmental factors in the same way. Some elements respond favorably to large quantities of bacon and whiskey, some do not. Or I should say cachaça, right? Is that right? Cachaça.
Yeah, that's good enough.
And some do not. Some respond favorably to exercise and sporting activities, but not all do. For some parts of ourselves, music and theater are empowering, but not always. We are complex organisms who inhabit a complex environment. At the same time, there's a state of well-being, our well-being as a whole, that constitutes our true happiness. It is the fact that we are complex organisms for whom it is difficult to achieve well-being as a whole that is reflected in this complexity in Spinoza's theory of natural goodness and natural badness. So far, I've been concerned with goodness and badness as they in terms of power, and have tried to show that as empowerment and as disempowerment, these are objective properties. Spinoza also talks about goodness and badness of actions and other things such as food and music and sporting activities. For Spinoza, independent of what makes us do something, independent of the emotions that make us act, an action is neither good nor evil. This is because good and bad do not apply to actions on their own, independent of the motivation behind the actions. An action does not contain goodness or badness as if its goodness or badness were a distinct feature of of an agent's behavior alongside, say, the features of your body, your limbs, your legs, your arms, your hands. Spinoza says, I think you have to go down a ways. Wait, no, that's right. Any action is called evil insofar as it arises from the fact that we have been affected with hate or with some evil affect. But no action considered in itself is good or evil. Instead, one and the same action is now good, now evil. Therefore, to the same action which is now evil or which arises from some evil affect, we can be led by reason. The point that Spinoza makes in this passage is that what makes it a bad action bad is that it is causally produced by a bad emotion. Independent of the emotion that produces something, our outward behavior is neither good nor bad. One and the same type of outward behavior, such as the type in which someone uses their fists to beat someone else, is bad in case the beating is motivated by hatred and good in case the beating is motivated by reason. It is not Spinoza's view that one and the same outward behavior motivated by one and the same motivation is bad in case someone has an unfavorable attitude toward it and is good in case someone has a favorable attitude toward it. Rather, he holds that the motivation that produces an agent's outward behavior makes his or her behavior either objectively good or objectively bad. Our emotions, depending on what emotions we're acting from, if we're acting from healthy emotions, he would say that we perform good actions when we act from unhealthy emotions, from sick emotions. Our actions are sick; they're unhealthy. In the United States, we have lots of incidents of unhealthy emotions, especially among young people who go into schools with guns on a regular basis. What Spinoza would say about these types of cases is you have unhealthy individuals committing unhealthy actions. Their actions are bad, and the badness of their actions comes from the fact that they're acting from unhealthy psychological states. That they're sick, that their minds are sick, and that their actions are also sick as a result. So we get from this, so if we scroll down a little bit, this hierarchy. So here we have actions that he thinks we could talk about as either ones that are always good or actions that are sometimes good, sometimes not. Repaying someone's hatred with love is always good. I don't know, he has some funny ones in here. Ones that are usually good but not always, like sex motivated by lust and physical beauty. So he was wrong about some things, Spinoza, but he got a lot of things right. Sometimes bad deeds motivated by fear. These are usually bad, but they can be okay sometimes. Actions that are always bad are destroying someone we hate or avenging wrongs with hatred. Anytime we act from hatred, we're acting from sickness, and we're producing sickness with our actions. So, what makes what makes good emotions good and good desires good, good deeds good, is the fact that they arise from increases in our power. And what makes bad emotions bad, bad desires bad, bad actions bad, is that they arise from impairments to our power. But this doesn't apply in the same way to external things like food or music or external objects, which can be good and bad as well. Unlike emotions, desires, and actions, the good-making characteristic of external objects is that they contribute to enhancements of our power. An external object's bad-making characteristic is that it contributes to impairments of our power. What makes food good, for example, is that it enhances our power. What makes bad food bad is that it impairs our power. Similarly, what makes music good is that it enhances our power. It is bad insofar as it impairs our power. Whether a certain type of natural object or type of artifact has power-enhancing or power-impairing effects is an objective matter of fact. For instance, that the mushroom Amanita phalloides, also known as the death cap, has power-impairing effects. That this type of poisonous mushroom is poisonous and thereby has power-impairing effects does not depend on our desires or emotions or beliefs about the power-impairing effects of such mushrooms. It's an objective matter of fact, as certain mushrooms are poisonous and will kill us or make us sick. Spinoza gives an example that people often look at. That one there at the top will do. He talks about music in that top example. He says, as far as good and evil are concerned, they also indicate nothing positive in things, consider themselves, nor are they anything other than modes of thinking or notions we form because we compare things to one another. For one and the same thing can, at the same time, be good and bad and also indifferent. For example, music is good for one who is melancholy, bad for one who is mourning, and neither good nor bad for one who is deaf. In saying that good and bad are nothing positive, he is saying that good and bad are not irreducible. A good thing's goodness goodness is nothing but its enhancing effect on our power. A bad thing's badness is nothing but its impairing effect on our power. Just as there is nothing good or bad in our outward behavior independent of the motivation that produces the behavior, there's nothing good or bad about in objects independent of their enhancing or impairing effects on our power. It's not as if a good thing contains goodness and somehow transmits that goodness to us whenever we're exposed to it. Water is good for someone who is thirsty and bad for someone who has dropsy. Strawberries are good for someone who is hungry and bad for someone who is allergic to them. Moderate amounts of pleasant food and drink are good for us, while enormous amounts are bad. Music is good for someone who is melancholy and bad for someone who is mourning. The effects that things have on our power vary in accordance with objective variations in our power. A person who is allergic to strawberries may love strawberries, but her love for strawberries does not change the fact that strawberries impair her power and therefore are bad for her. Some people love chicasa. Am I getting that? I'm not getting that right. Is it? Cachaça, sorry. I have to just stick with my whiskey. Some people love whiskey, but that does not change the fact that an excessive amount of whiskey is bad. Whether something enhances or impairs our power is not up to us in a wishy-washy, subjectivist sense. For Spinoza, our tastes and preferences, our likes and dislikes, do not decide what is truly good for us or bad for us. Note that he thinks that, in that second quote there, he thinks that someone who is under the spell of a savage and sad superstition may be convinced that the power-enhancing effect of music is a bad thing, and that the power-impairing effect of, say, fasting is good. Indeed, people who are under the spell of a savage and sad superstition believe that badness is identical to power enhancement and that goodness is identical to power impairment. But Spinoza says, and this is that next quote there on the board, he says, superstition, on the other hand, seems to maintain that the good... Oh, no, it's okay. Yeah, that one. That's fine. That second one there. Spinoza, on the other hand, seems to maintain that the good is what brings sadness and that evil what brings joy. But as we've already said, no one, unless he is envious, takes pleasure in my lack of power and misfortune. For as we are affected with a greater joy, we pass to greater perfection, and consequently participate more in the divine nature. So this passage strongly supports that Spinoza is committed to a type of ethical objectivism. The superstitious, in Spinoza's view, are mistaken about goodness and badness. It is not just that they have different preferences than we do. That is only part of their problem. They also are plainly wrong about an objective matter of fact, that goodness is identical to power enhancement, and that badness is identical to power impairment. As we've seen, at least in one of the points I think we might have passed over, but Spinoza maintains that to nourish the body in the way required, it is necessary to use many different kinds of food. That's a quote. He says that to nourish the body in the way required, it is necessary to use many different kinds of food. And one of his points here is that by making comparisons of the nourishing effects of different kinds of foods, we arrive at knowledge that some edible things are better for us than others, and that some quantities of food and drink are better for us than other quantities. Nature did not provide us with a menu listing the nutritional data of its contents. It is only by comparing the power-enhancing and the power-impairing effects of different things and different quantities of things that we come to have nutritional data, that is, knowledge of good and bad foods. And one condition that's necessary for making such comparisons is that our power can be impaired. If we were never able to go through a decrease in power, or have our health impaired in some way, we would never conceive of good and evil according to Spinoza. We would have no idea of good because we never had any notion, we would never have any experience of evil. Evil being an impairment to our health. My conclusion here is that, briefly, Spinoza subscribes to naturalistic ethical objectivism. He attempts to demonstrate a theory of the kind of life that is best for us as human beings. And his theory rests on a view on which goodness and badness are objective properties. Human goodness is identical to empowerment, to empower ourselves as a whole, our whole being. Badness is identical to the impairment of an individual's power as a whole. Our psychological states and things derive their goodness and badness from their connection to enhancements and impairments to our power. Cheerfulness is always good because it is the effective manifestation of an increase in your power as a whole. Pity is usually bad because it originates in a decrease in your power, in one part of yourself. A desire to benefit others out of pity is usually bad because such a desire ultimately originates in a decrease in your power. A deed motivated by a desire arising from pity is usually bad because am I repeating myself or? Sorry. A deed motivated by a desire arising from pity is usually bad because it is motivated by a desire that arises from an emotion that originates in an impairment of power. A shot of whiskey is often good, or usually good, because it increases power in part of yourself. Thus, good and bad are objective properties because they are identical to natural properties that are to themselves objective. Thank you.
Okay, so now we should open for questions and grilling of Professor Youpa. And since I am in the position of power here, I will exercise my rights of paramountness, to quote Neil Gaiman. I have not one, but 3 questions. Now, you'll be mad at me, but I wonder if what you're saying doesn't imply the necessity of an intelligent design in our attributes in order for moral objectivism to work. I mean, doesn't your interpretation of ethical objectivism in Spinoza that you take, if I understand you correctly, to be a currently defensible notion of more ethical objectivism, and not just a defensible notion in 16th century Dutchland, relies on a conception of morality, even though on a deist conception of morality, even though it is a deist in the sense of the appendix, in the one appendix, it is still a deist and intelligently designed notion. Which brings me to my 2 questions here, which is, can we still rely on a stable grammar of emotions that grounds, for example, what effective therapy is? That is, wouldn't we need to rely on a more flexible grammar for emotions? I mean, because I get the same problem in authors that I know you have no sympathy for, like Schelling and Heidegger. But if you look at Schelling and Heidegger, they would take hatred, for example, to be considered authentic and original, and for similar immanent reasons. So this would be an interesting point here on what I would take as a disadvantage of taking a very stable grammar for these emotions. And my second question is, if there is no one there to eat a deadly mushroom, is it still a deadly mushroom? Are there deadly mushrooms in a possible world without a language in which we describe deadly mushes? So that would be my 2 points, no, my 3 points then, right? Don't you think that what you're doing relies on an intelligent design for morality? Do we actually need this stable grammar of emotions? Are there advantages of taking it? And how do you deal with the question of, absence of language then?
Thank you for your questions. No, it doesn't. The kind of view that Spinoza has here does not depend on an intelligent design view or a deist conception of morality. Any more than our ordinary views of health and illness depend on any kind of theistic view. We go to the doctor. We go to the doctors. We go see doctors all the time, and we don't ask whether our doctors are religious. I've never asked. I have no idea whether my doctor has ever been to church, or whether her medical science relies on a conception of God to this, and that's the kind of position that Spinoza has. His view of God, he refers to God as nature, and nature is God, and
But it is an intelligently designed nature.
the
There is an intention behind the way in which that moral assertion looks in Spinoza, no?
not for Spinoza, no, there's no intention. That's one of his big points about misconceiving God as someone who cares in that kind of way that would have intentions. It's a completely impersonal thing, Spinoza's God or nature. Do we need a stable or flexible grammar of emotions? I think he would opt for something more flexible, because I think one of his points is that we only learn what's good or bad for us through experiment and experience and observation. We find out that music is good for the melancholy and bad for the mourning because we see how it plays out with those who are depressed and or mourning, and we find out through experience that way. And we might have to revise, or we find out that strawberries are healthy for some people, but they'll kill other people, and we find that out from experience. And we have to make revisions to things as we come across new information about how things are either empowering us or disempowering us in this way. And poisonous mushrooms were poisonous before anyone ate them. I'm sure at some point there was a poisonous mushroom out there that no one had ever heard of before, and the reason why we now know that it's poisonous is because the person ate it and died. So yeah, they're poisonous, but it's not as if their badness has to do with certain qualities that they have and certain qualities of our digestive system, and that's true for all the things we consume. There are certain things that our digestive system does well with, and certain things that it doesn't, and that's true for animals. What is it that you're not supposed to feed dogs? Chocolate. Yeah. So you who live on chocolate, right? You can't feed a dog chocolate because it will kill them. So we learn these things as we go. So we should have a flexible grammar for emotions, and I think it's yeah.
Thank you, Andrew, for your talk. Sorry, I don't know too much Spinoza, and because this I have to ask something first. How Spinoza understands emotions? He understands as a feeling, because when you said pain as emotion, some philosophers just say that pain or pleasure is just a feeling, and I'm asking this because it's important, because I'm a masochist. Can I say that? Yeah, masochist feel good with pain, and because some philosophers today like to separate emotions and feelings. And some philosophers say emotions are more intentional, and because they motivate the moral action and something like that.
Wait, what was the last point? They what?
Sorry, which?
Just that last sentence.
Okay, no, I don't know if you will ask the last one, but because some philosophers say it's important the way that you understand the emotion, if they are intentional or not, cognitive or not, but not dependent on cognitive, I think, but if it's intentional, if you want to talk about the motivation and mainly moral motivation, and because I can't say about the action, some action, I just react. But if I'm talking about other kind of action, like as a moral action, I need the other thing. Okay?
So,
Wait.
I mean, I think one thing that's interesting about his view of emotion is that an emotion is information. It's information. It's information about your power. So depression is information about your psychological health. It means that deep down there's something broken there. In the same way that pain, like if I cut myself, the pain is an indication that there's a problem in my finger. If I cut my finger. And so emotions, all emotions for Spinoza are information about whether the system is working well or poorly. Whether this system is working well or poorly. And so understanding emotions, so when somebody's feeling joy because part of what we learn when we feel joy is that the system is working properly. And what?
Notness.
What's that?
Does not happen necessarily. Isso não acontece necessariamente. Né?
Not necessarily.
It's not necessary.
What isn't necessary?
If something good happens, you are more healthy.
It's not necessary that every time that something good happens, you are going to be more healthy.
Right. No, of course. No. But for Spinoza, every psychological state is information about your well-being. Every psychological state that you're in tells you something about whether you're doing well or poorly. Just as your physiological states, your physical states indicate signs of health or illness. But that's not all of what an emotion is for Spinoza. It's not just information. It is the feeling side, and that's how we become aware of the information. The information is presented to us through the feeling. It's because depression feels a certain way that we recognize that something's going wrong with us. And then we can find out, maybe it's because, I don't know, maybe it's because of my diet, or maybe it's because of some psychological trauma that I had, or maybe it's because, we can then look to see what it is that's causing this, what is the source of the illness, but the emotions are feelings, and that's how the feelings are actually they indicate that whether there's something going well or poorly for us. That's how we become aware of whether we're doing well or not.
That's fine, but I don't agree with this.
Okay.
Because sometimes some people can feel depressed, and that can be good for their health. Not in the time they are feeling this, but it's good because they are looking for something good for them that they have to change.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
I think it's more complex. I understand what are you saying.
And he allows for that, right?
I think we have more complex things to discuss.
But Spinoza can allow for that. I mean, Spinoza would say that, yeah, sometimes sadness is a good thing. It's not always bad. Sometimes happiness is a bad thing.
Yeah.
So when somebody gets happy because they see some terrible thing happen to somebody, that's not a good kind of happiness. There are good kinds of happiness and bad kinds. So it's complicated. And this is something, that we can become better and better at understanding about ourselves. So we and hopefully we can become better and better. And, but yeah, I think he recognizes that it's going to be very complex.
Yes.
Can I answer your question about the masochist?
No, you didn't.
I mean, I think
Oh yeah, you
No,
need
about
to.
the motivation.
So somebody who takes pleasure in other people's pain is he refers to those people as they are in a way sick. You know, that only somebody who is suffering from some kind of hatred would take pleasure in my pain.
But then everyone
But that's kind of the point, though, that everyone is kind of sick and everyone is kind of well, right?
Yeah,
That's what I got.
There's some. I mean, in the same way that physically, you know, nobody's in perfect health. I mean, physically speaking, right? I mean, none of us is invulnerable. Oh, yes. I'm sorry. But I mean, generally speaking, we all have our physically issues and our mental issues, and that doesn't seem weird, does it? I mean, I don't know. I feel like that makes some pretty good sense of most of the people I've met in my life, especially family.
No, that's cool. Ok, I have 3 in line. Anybody else? 3 na fila. Alguém mais? Última chamada? Ok. Volte.
Andrew, thanks a lot for your conference, and I have 2 questions. The first one is a simple one. How can you say that this kind of view is flexible and at the same time it is an objectivism theory, moral theory? And the second one is well, we are discussing the social contract here, and I mean, not to be a Rawlsian, but Rawls would say that, well, this moral view is absolutely okay, and from the that's almost not a question. I want to hear your opinion about how can we think about it, but Rawls would say this is just one more conception of morality, and the question he makes is and what can we do in the political sense with that? And just ask if we can think of a political consequence of this question, or
no, I mean, Spinoza thinks that, Spinoza.
So the first question, how can you say it is flexible and objective? I think ethical objectivism has a bad rap in this way, that it's thought to be inflexible. And I mean, one thing that, as an objectivist, which I am some kind of objectivist about morality, one thing that I'm not flexible about is respecting people and tolerance. That those are good things. And that's not negotiable in my book. And it's true that it's good, that tolerance and respect are good. There's good reason to think that. It's a fact. And so flexibility is, and I don't understand how non-objectivists can hold that flexibility or tolerance are good things when there's no fact in the matter about whether anything's good or bad. So for me, I feel like there are certain things that are it's true that toleration and respecting other people's lifestyles and so on is it's obviously a positive thing. It's a healthy way of living to have, to approach other people in this way, and it promotes health in others. I think hatred and intolerance breed hatred and intolerance, and more sickness and more violence, and those are all bad. It's a fact. So I think that it's because Spinoza is an objectivist, or because I agree with him on this point. Maybe I'm just reading my views into Spinoza or something, but it's because I respect flexibility and pluralism that I am an objectivist. because I value those things. Those things are good. Those things are the right way. I don't have people who want to make divisions like between races, like say, racists who want to say that a certain race is superior to another, or a certain gender is superior to another, or a certain religion is superior to another. Those are all falsehoods. They're wrong. They're ignorant. And they're just getting things wrong. I have no tolerance for that. For those kinds of views. That doesn't mean that I don't have any tolerance for it doesn't mean I'm trying to
but I
do anything. I'm just saying. I think that their heads are full of falsehoods.
But violence is not always bad. If you think in self-defense,
Right.
for instance.
Exactly. And
But
Spinoza allows for that.
Are you thinking?
And that's why Spinoza says that somebody who defends themselves from being assaulted, their actions are okay. They're good. I mean, if somebody's attacking you, if a woman is being attacked by some guy and he's a rapist and she beats him off, her act of beating is a good thing. The rapist's actions, because he's trying to rape her, motivated by what he is, are bad. So there's nothing. Our actions are good or bad depending on whether they're coming from a place of sickness or health. And then the social contract. So Spinoza is a contractualist, and the idea is he thinks that it's because we're all kind of sick that we need to make a social contract. It's because we're not perfect. It's because we often have, we're often overcome by certain emotions, like hatred or anger, when we're all vulnerable to these, we're all vulnerable to being swept up in an emotion and doing all kinds of terrible things. And it's because we're vulnerable that we need to establish a contract and then give ourselves incentives, like penalties and punishments, extra incentives not to do the things that we know we're prone to do. For instance, like when, I don't know, my soccer team loses, and I go out and I burn cop cars or something, and it's like, well, we just can't.
Botafogo loses in your
Yeah, when Botafogo loses, I just became a fan of Botafogo this week. But yeah, so when they lose now, I'm going to be up in the United States running around Carbondale turning cop cars over, and people are going to be like, what is this guy doing? But we establish a social contract and rules because we know we're subject to these kinds of crazy behaviors because we're all vulnerable to. Nobody's impervious to trauma, and nobody's impervious to acting out of trauma. One of the things that happens when our soldiers return from war with post-traumatic stress syndrome is that they often they act out their pain by living recklessly, by self-medicating, by drinking, by taking out their motorcycles and driving 150 miles an hour down the road and crashing into things. So we're all vulnerable to these things, and we pass them to one another in the way that child abuse passes that sickness on to the children, and the children raise children and abusive children. And so we establish a social contract in order to provide ourselves with extra incentive to, so I know that just because Botafogo loses, I need extra incentive. I need there to be a penalty for going out and turning the cop cars over tonight, or whatever it is. And that's what the contract, and then we can measure, and then what part of the point of the social contract, what makes one social contract better than another, is that it promotes our health.
And it makes it objectively better than others, right?
Mm-hmm.
That would be a reading.
Exactly. So some systems will promote, some social contracts will promote health better than others. Like the Norwegian system is promoting the health of its citizens better than the system in the United States. because obviously we're a bunch of sickos and they're all quite sane and normal and well-adjusted.
Have you met Johannes?
I really need a social contract.
Yeah.
But that's how he would measure the difference between different systems of government and different social contracts, is how well he thinks that establishing the social contract is just the beginning of the story. Setting up the institutions in a way that actually promotes mental health is the key. And ultimately this is a matter of making ourselves more free. He thinks that freedom is what we're ultimately, being free from mental diseases and psychological diseases, and being able to act in the world is the ideal. Is there
Yeah. Johannes has a very fast question that will motivate a very fast answer.
I think you've answered.
Oh, really? Okay. Marcus, do you want to jump into it?
That's okay.
You're done? Okay.
So,
Andrew and Johannes, thanks a lot. It was really great. And, had a great time with you. E gostaria de agradecer a todos, então, por terem paciência e por suportarem todo o evento. E, a gente espera fazer pelo menos um evento bianual, talvez nem seja aqui na Rural. Vamos ver ainda, conversar com os membros do grupo. E agradeço a todos, então.